The annual Wijk-aan Zee tournament, sponsored by Tata Steel, has just finished in Holland and ended in a victory for Magnus Carlsen. Second equal came Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Anish Giri, Wesley So and Ding Liren, and following them in sixth place was Vasily Ivanchuk. As usual, this was a splendid event, tremendously strong, and produced some very exciting and interesting games. Now, in these days, the chess press covers events such as Wijk-aan Zee extensively and almost immediately. So I'm not going to focus on a game which perhaps has been analysed extensively already. I'm going to look at a game from the last round between Badur Jobava and Timur Radjabov, and this is my BCM Game of the Month for February 2015. Now, Jobava in this event, he's some sort of hero. He comes to these events and he plays in a carefree, almost carefree style. It's almost as if he doesn't want to play modern chess. He just wants to play in his own style. And, of course, when you're playing against the world's elite, this is an extremely risky thing to do. We know that Jobava is a tremendous player, but when he's playing all sorts of risky openings, you can come to grief very quickly against great players. Quite typical of Jobava's style is the opening he adopted in this game against the King's Indian specialist Radjabov. I mean, the thing is, when the opponent's going to play something unusual, just stick to what you know. And so there's no need for black to deviate from his normal King's Indian. He's basically just waiting to see what surprise Jobava's going to come up with. And sure enough, after castles, white launches the immediate attack with h4. Now, I very much doubt this can be good. It's a kind of bayonet attack against the black king. There's also g4 in this position. There are a few grandmasters who like this type of play. Simon Williams from England is one who immediately comes to mind. But black should have plenty of resources against this flank attack. And one way to try to dismantle the white idea is to attack in the centre straight away with c5. And that's exactly what Radjabov did. White pushed forward with d5. And you see, if black delays his counterplay in this position, then the white attack is very strong. Basically, white's going to go h5. Then one idea is to put the queen up on d3. The queen swings across to g3. The queen comes up to h4, a square that the pawn has now vacated, and then white takes on h6. And if black isn't very careful, he can just get mown down by this direct plan. And of course, the one advantage in this position that white has is that he hasn't yet moved the bishop on c1. So for instance, if you could imagine a white queen or h4 and the h-file open, then bishop h6 comes, suddenly black is under immense pressure. So black has basically got to decide more or less immediately once he goes c5 how he's going to fashion his counterplay. Is he going to play this position in Benoni style with e6? Or is he going to play as Radjabov did? And I think this is a very logical way to play the Benko response with b5. Black's pressure on the queen side comes very quickly. Black's threatening b4 immediately. And when white takes, black's just going to sack a pawn in the style of the Benko. And to me, this is a very logical way to meet this kind of flank attack. And it also works against g4. Well, Jobava had this before. He took on a6. And now black played queen a5. It's basically all hands to the pump in this position. Counterplay must come immediately before white goes through with that rather routine attacking plan that I've just described. But knight takes e4 is now a serious threat. White played bishop d2 to stop it, and black took on a6 with the bishop. White pushed on. Black played knight bd7. And in a way, white's just saying, well, the Benko gambit is rubbish. I can get away with almost anything when he plays like this. In fact, Jobava had already won a game with this system against Atalik in 2012. But now he plays a new move here. Bishop takes a6. Well, to be honest, that doesn't look too great from where I'm sitting, because after queen takes a6, it gives black tremendous control of the light squares, and already black's threatening knight e5. But if we just drop back let's just go back to this game against Atalik from 2012. And there, white played king f1. Black played rook fb8. White played b3. And now black put his knight in on e5. And if black plays this position correctly, basically he must have a very good game indeed. There, Jobava played knight f3. And perhaps Atalik didn't find the most precise continuation here, which to me looks like knight takes f3, which obliges white to double his own pawns, and then comes takes on e2 check. Well, this is a slightly embarrassing position for white. He's got to take back with the knight. If he takes back with the queen, we've got rook takes b3. So knight takes e2, and now just a move like queen a3, bishop c3, knight h5, takes, and black has a pretty good position here. He's getting ready to invade on the queen side. He's threatening rook takes b3, and he's got good control of the dark squares. So perhaps that's what Atalik should have done. Going back to the game itself, as another perhaps micro improvement for white, I could suggest queen c2 here. And if rook fb8, try to tough it out with knight to d1. This type of thing might look passive, but the idea is to put the bishop on c3. And, as I say, try to tough this out. It's possible that Jobava may go this way in the future, because when you run this through the engines, it's coming out as a slight advantage to white. Instinctively, I feel black should have enough counterplay here, but he's still got to prove it. Now, back in the game, this bishop takes a6 move, queen takes a6, knight ge2. I mean, this is basically asking for it. And this is the type of carefree style that has led Jobava into difficulties against the world's elite. Whereas for black, it's fairly easy to play moves in this position. You just play typical Benko moves, hitting on the queenside pawns. In this case, hitting on e4. You've got knight e5 to d3 coming up. For white, it's really difficult to find defensive moves. Already white's down to playing a3, which he really doesn't want to do. And now Radjabov just dropped back and double rooks on the b file, followed by putting his knight in on e5 as advertised. And this is just like a dream position for black. But surprisingly, a little bit further down the line, black doesn't actually follow this excellent play up correctly. Well, white played f3, and now one of those paradoxical moves that makes the Benko such an attractive opening for black. Black voluntarily offers the exchange of queens. The point is that white needs his queen quite often in the Benko to attack the black king. That's his only source of counterplay. So when the queens come off, what you've got is a situation where black's got loads of active pieces and white's very passive. And it's exactly that happens in this game. Rook fc1. But now, I think Radjabov is guilty of perhaps playing an automatic move here. He took on c2. Perhaps he couldn't quite believe that knight takes f3 check is strong here. But to me, this looks incredibly strong. The white pieces struggle to get back to defend the king. And for instance, after, let's say, rook f1, which I think is the best move, we've got various checks with the queen, keeping the white king stuck there on the king side. And now we gradually introduce our knight into the game. And after king e1, knight h2, rook h1, queen g2, black has infiltrated and must stand tremendously well. It's hard to imagine why Radjabov would reject this continuation, apart from the fact that this was in the last round, and you know, playing a tournament at this level is pretty exhausting. So they might have been just tired, and nevertheless, it's hard to think that he didn't play this way. But anyway, in the game, black still got quite a nice position. He takes on c2 and then he plays knight c4. And black has got the usual Benko gambit pressure. So white now tries to set up what is a favourable position on the queen side. Essentially, in the Benko, exchanges of knights favour black. But here, all the knights remain on the board. So white's idea in playing a4 is, for instance, to play his knight up to b5 and then to go b3. which kind of nullifies the effect of the bishop on g7. And the effect of this plan is seen in the line where black takes on d2 and then plays knight d7. Now white gets to stick his knight in on b5. Black must play rook a8 and then b3, setting up this well, not exactly fireproof formation, but one that's difficult to crack. I mean, I guess black's got to go c4 here, and then we get a position after rook takes rook c2, which is pretty unclear. I would imagine this thing's about equal, but white's still a pawn up. Black has pressure for the pawn, typical Benko Gambit scenario. Well, Radjabov didn't like that and hastened to regain his pawn in the game with knight takes b2. White went a5, and now black put his knight in on d3. And basically, white is now basing his hopes on the a pawn, which again is a very typical Benko Gambit scenario. I mean, if black didn't have the opportunity to rush his knight back to the defence here, then I think black would be in trouble. The problem for white is that he does. He can blockade, and he did, with knight a6. So now I think, well, it's game on. If both players want to play this out, it's game on. You know, black's got the better pawn structure. White's got the a pawn. Perhaps white's king is able to get to the centre more easily than black's king. It's probably about equal, but there's plenty of play left, as black has definite pressure on the b file. So the game continued, king f1, knight e5. Of course, white's got to be very careful about the infiltration of the black knights, so he covers d3. In comes black's rook, white plays king e2, and now black play king f8, which I think is correct. And now white's got to come up with some sort of plan. So he struck out with g4. And the idea of this, I think, is to gain space on the king side. g5 is coming, and then maybe knight e3 to c4. So black played knight d7. I mean, looking at it objectively, perhaps black should continue to rush his king towards the queen side. Something like this. Maybe that was the best continuation. But even there, white has knight e3. And he's going to play f4, put his knight on c4. It's not that easy for black. So the knight came to d7. Going back to the game. White gained some space there. Black put his bishop in on d4. And now Jobava continued the fight by bringing his king to c2. Ejecting black's rook. And then came f4. So this is the logical culmination of the plan started with g4. White gains space and forces the issue after knight e2. Radjabov took on d2. White recaptured. The bishop went back to g7. And now white put his knight in on e3. The black rook came in check. There was another check and a pin. You know, again, there's plenty of play in this position. It's not dead by any means. The white position, is it loose, or is white gaining space there in the centre? There's no doubt about it. The a pawn does tie black down to an extent. It's still unclear. White pushes forward with the sharp e5. I mean, obviously, he could have played knight c4 first and then played e5. The reason he probably didn't do this was rook to d3, and the black rook gets active. There are some exchanges, and then the black rook comes back to d3. So maybe e5 is designed to forestall that idea. Black played rook d2, and now white put his king on f3. Trying to maintain the centre. Of course, if black takes on e5, there's a knight c4 fork. So black played king e8. White took on d6. Now he's created a target there on d6. And now knight to g3. Activating the other knight with the idea of knight e4. So black protects his pawn. White goes knight e4. And then rook to b2. And the knight comes to c4. So all very thematic play. We've got a Benoni pawn structure in front of us. The Achilles heel on d6 is now visible. White's attacking it with everything he's got. Black angles to exchange the rooks. And the idea is once the rook comes off, counterplay is created by the b pawn. Knight e takes d6. White realises he's going to have to sacrifice a piece here or maybe he doesn't. b2, but Jobava goes in with knight takes b2. I mean, maybe he could have just considered knight d2 in this position. But Jobava's not a guy who likes to play passively. Knight takes b2, bishop takes b2, knight e5 check. That was the clear idea. And now, unfortunately for Radjabov, he makes a mistake. I mean, this is move 51. It's been a long, grueling game. And defending this endgame, I would imagine, with the clock ticking at the end of a long session, is not particularly easy. Well, black played king e7. And that is obviously poor, because it allows white to take on g6 with check. What he should do is to take on e5. This is counterintuitive because it allows the white pawns to join up. And you wouldn't imagine that the black knight had much of a chance restraining the white pawns in this position. But it turns out that black can play either knight c5 here or king e7. And the problem is that the white king can't approach very easily the queen side. And for instance, if white goes king e3 here, black plays knight c5. And the problem is that if white goes to either d4 or d2, black has knight to b3 check. Now, going back to king e7, if white tries to approach the other way by going king e2 and then king d1, knight a6 and then king d2, well, black has another resource, which again is very difficult to miss when you're tired, knight to b4. And the idea is that you encourage the white pawns forward and then you can blockade with your king miraculously on c6. And it's pretty much surprising that actually white can't make progress in this position, but the black knight is very secure on a6 and white's pawns are a little bit stymied. So that's what Radjabov should have done. But I ask you to consider what you would have done in this position. It's not easy. Knight e5 check, black played king e7. The problem with that, of course, is that, black's given away his valuable g-pawn. So now white has a spread of passed pawns all the way across the board. And this makes black's life intolerable. Well, black took on e5. Probably just he'd given up hope at this point. The end of a very long tournament. And he just wants the game to finish. And whatever black does here, I don't think he can escape if he takes on e5. As I say, the white pawns are far too far apart for black to contemplate stopping them. Something like this wins immediately. And a similar thing occurs in the game. If we go back to the game, g6, king e6, king g4. The black knight's absolutely useless against these passed pawns spread out all over the board. And now knight e8 was the last move in the game. Queen, king g5, knight takes g8, and then a6. So I like that game. It had a degree of originality about it in the opening, as we've come to expect from Jobava. It had Benko gambit pressure, which actually should have been enough to give Radjabov a decisive advantage, but he missed his opportunity. And then excellent fighting play throughout the middle game, leading to an interesting endgame. So a worthy game of the month for February. Thank you for viewing, and congratulations to both players for their sterling performance.